Is that pumpkin pie? You really brought it again?
It's Aunt Julia's favorite. She said so last year.
We told you not to bring anything. You just don't listen, huh?
Let's just go inside, Mom. Lily's hands are freezing. Thanksgiving in Aurora, Colorado was always a time when the whole family gathered at my sister's two-story house. Amanda Reynolds, a full-time homemaker with over 20,000 Instagram followers, just to show off her organic dishes and a kitchen corner that looked like it stepped straight out of Pinterest. I, Natalie Brooks, was a single mom, working evening shifts as a cashier at a cafe near my kids' elementary school. I didn't have much, but I had heart, and I had two kids, Max, 13, and little Lily, 8. Every year I brought the pumpkin pie that Julia, the artist cousin on my ex-husband's side, once raved about. Not because I thought it would make it to the main table, but because I wanted my kids to believe we still had value to contribute. When I parked in front of Amanda's house, I took a deep breath, adjusted Lily's coat, and told Max, "Smile a little, buddy. This is family." My sister opened the door, her smile like it had been switched on, polite, perfect, and cold. She wore a wine-red velvet dress, her hair curled meticulously, looking like she was playing the lead role in a Thanksgiving musical titled Thanksgiving Queen. And me? My denim jacket was frayed, my hair tied hastily with a rubber band from my wrist, and the pumpkin pie box clutched in my hands like a small prayer. We stepped inside, and like every year, no one truly saw us. No welcoming eyes, no hugs, no waves from the cousins. The house was filled with the scent of cinnamon, butter, and wine. Laughter spilled from the dining room like invisible blades, slicing through the thin layer of calm I had brought with me. Amanda glanced around, then quietly said, "Seating's a bit tight this year. You don't mind sitting downstairs in the spare room, do you?" "What room?" "The laundry room. It's been cleaned up, cozy. There's a small table and folding chairs for the three of you." I thought I misheard, but Max didn't. He squeezed my hand tightly, and Lily looked down at her muddy pink pig shoes, saying nothing. I nodded, like every year, because I didn't want to be the difficult one, because I had learned how to smile even when I felt like breaking. I led my kids through the kitchen, where cousins chatted cheerfully with guests, and down to the laundry room tucked behind the back door. A folding wooden table was pushed up against the wall, a flickering fluorescent bulb overhead, and the dryer humming softly like a labored breath. I set the pie on the table. Max sat silently. Lily climbed into the orange plastic child's chair, her tiny hand resting lightly on her knee. I took a spoon, divided the pie into 3 small slices. No need for a knife, no decoration, because I knew no one else would touch it. Lily whispered, "Mommy, why does Aunt Amanda not want us with them?" I knelt down, retying her shoelace as if it were the most important task in the world, then gently said, "Because they forgot how to see people like us, honey." At that moment, I felt as if someone had redrawn the invisible boundary between those who belong and those who don't. Family doesn't always mean kinship. Some hugs are not meant for you. Some meals make you hungrier with shame. Some laughter isn't for you to join in. It's there to remind you you're not inside the circle. Max looked up at me, his gaze calm in a way that felt far too grown. "Next year, let's not come back, Mom." I didn't answer, but inside I knew a shift had just occurred. No more tears, no more hoping for change, just a kind of cold clarity, something society calls self-awareness, and I call enough. I poured water into 3 thin plastic cups like we were in a fine dining restaurant, and as I raised my cup with my 2 children, I whispered, "Happy Thanksgiving, babies. Wherever we are, this is family." It wasn't because they put us in the laundry room. It was because I let us stay there, but never again. Not one more time. I learned something that day. Not everyone who invites you actually wants you there, and not everyone who shares your blood can be called family. The dryer was still humming steadily behind me as the 3 of us sat eating slices of cold pumpkin pie under the fluorescent light. I don't remember if the pie tasted good. I only remember Max's eyes that no longer expected anything from anyone but me, and Lily's tiny hand resting on my wrist as if to say, "I'm still here, Mom." I was packing the last crumbs into a plastic container when we heard the screech of a car braking outside the back door. Max looked up. Lily stopped mid-bite and looked at me. I thought it was just a neighbor's car. But then the headlights swept across the small window above the washing machine and stopped right where the three of us were sitting. A beam of white light streamed in, making the little room feel detached from the world it used to belong to. "Mom, look at that car," Max said, his voice tinged with excitement. I stepped closer to the back door, gently pulling aside the thin curtain. My heart tightened. A sleek black limousine sat silently on the gravel driveway leading to the backyard. No state plates, no recognizable branding. Just a quiet elegance surrounding it, like a movie scene where I'd never been cast. A man in a suit, wearing white gloves, opened the car door. Out stepped an older woman, graceful in posture, her face bearing the weight of experience but none of its bitterness. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, and a slate gray wool coat draped over a knee-length knit dress. Under the soft porch light, her eyes scanned the yard until they stopped, exactly, at the spot where I was standing. Lily whispered, "Mommy, she's looking at us." I gently squeezed her hand and cracked the back door open. A gust of early winter wind rushed in, carrying a faint scent of jasmine. The woman spoke. "Hello, dear. Are you Natalie Brooks?" I nodded, unable to hide my confusion. "Yes, I am." She smiled softly, without pretense but with certainty. "Good. I'm Evelyn Rhodes, Executive Director of the Voices Rising organization. I'm here because of a post, actually a series of posts, that you shared last year on the Strong Mothers, Strong Voices forum." I could barely breathe. Those posts, the ones I typed hurriedly while Max had a fever and Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, the thoughts I never believed anyone would read. You wrote with such honesty, painful but not bitter, struggling but not complaining. And in that silence, people saw something not many dare to show, resilience growing little by little. I stood frozen, feeling as if someone had just pulled back the veil over the part of my life I kept hidden. Evelyn stepped forward, her eyes meeting mine. "You didn't write to be discovered, but that's exactly why you deserve to be found." I couldn't hold it in. "But why did you come here? How did you know I was in the laundry room?" She glanced gently into the cramped space behind me. "I didn't. But when we found your name on an old volunteer list at a single mother's support center in Denver, I thought, if she's still nearby, I need to go myself. I can't let someone like you be forgotten." I turned to look at Max and Lily. Max still held that cautious, measured gaze, far too mature for his age. Lily clung to my hand as if gripping a fragile thread of hope she hadn't yet dared to believe in. Evelyn continued, "We want to invite you to be the keynote speaker at Voices Rising's spring conference. We want you to tell your story, from the beginning. No filters, no embellishment, just the truth you've lived through. We also plan to compile your previous posts into a manuscript for publication, if you're willing." I had never thought of myself as someone who could write a book, never dreamed I'd step onto a stage. I had only ever dreamed of having a seat at the table. "You can say no," Evelyn said gently, like the wind. "But I believe you've been waiting your whole life for someone to see you without you having to scream." I looked back at the laundry room, the place where an entire holiday had been shrunk into a few slices of pie, 3 plastic cups, and the low hum of a dryer like background music to quiet despair. Then I looked at my children. One had learned silence. The other was still asking, why? And I knew. It was time to stop asking why others didn't see me. It was time to rise for myself, not to be chosen, but to choose my own path. I turned to Evelyn, my heart still trembling, but my eyes no longer lowered. "I'll go. I'll tell it all, and I won't apologize for living truthfully." The limousine quietly pulled away from the back of Amanda's house, its wheels gliding over the gravel path as if not to wake the lingering ghosts of memories left behind in that dim laundry room. I sat between my 2 children, the pumpkin pie box still resting in Max's hands like a silent heirloom, while Lily leaned her head against my shoulder, her wide eyes fixed on the golden lights on the car's ceiling. as if trying to memorize this magical moment with her whole heart. I had never stepped into a car like this before, never sat in a space so quiet that each breath echoed like a confirmation that I was truly present. Evelyn sat in the front, behind the glass partition, her face glowing with a calm, knowing expression. She leaned slightly and smiled gently, saying, "I know this all feels sudden, but I've been following your path longer than you think, Natalie." I looked at her, still not quite believing. "I only wrote a few lines so I wouldn't fall apart," I confessed, my voice trembling. "Back then, I didn't think anyone would read them." "That's exactly why people read them," Evelyn said. "You didn't write for attention. You wrote to survive. And that made every word cut deeper than any polished speech." We arrived at a small restaurant on the edge of the city, not glamorous like the ones I'd seen in movies, but refined in every detail. On the table lay a clearly printed contract, Natalie Brooks, keynote speaker, Voices Rising Spring Conference 2026. I held the paper, my hand still shaking. Everything here felt too formal, too far removed from the utility bills I was used to managing every month. Evelyn pulled a chair beside me, her gaze not pressuring, only resolute. "We'll take care of everything. Flights, hotel, childcare during the conference. You only have to do one thing. Tell your story, in your own way, without cleaning up the pain or covering the scars." I looked at the contract, then at Lily, who was playing with her drink using a red curly straw, and Max, the child who had learned how to sit silently at parties, not meant for him. I thought of all those sleepless nights writing journal entries on an old phone, when the Wi-Fi was so weak that posting a single entry meant waiting until dawn. And now, those words written in the dark had become the very thing opening the biggest door of my life. Evelyn placed her hand on mine. "You're not a celebrity, not an expert, but that's exactly what makes you the perfect choice. People don't need a flashy icon. They need the truth." I nodded. No more hesitation, no more fear, no more asking for permission to be present. I signed. As the pen lifted from the paper, I felt a sense of peace rise, not because I had just been validated, but because for the first time I stopped trying to be someone else. I was finally just myself, and that was enough. On the way back to the hotel, Max looked at me, his eyes sparkling. "Mom, you're kind of famous now." I laughed, shaking my head. "Not famous, baby, just seen." The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror in our small hotel room, holding the draft of my first speech. My heart pounded, but this time not from fear, from knowing that what I was about to do truly mattered. I no longer wrote for 10 Facebook friends. I was preparing to speak to hundreds of women waiting for a story like theirs, not perfect, but real. I had once been seated in a laundry room in my own sister's house. Today, I was about to step onto the main stage of a national conference. No one invited me up there because of fame. I was invited because of authenticity. Because I had once fallen, once felt lost, once questioned if I was even worth listening to. And now, I knew the answer. I no longer needed to search for a seat at someone else's table. I had been handed an entire stage. I stood backstage, the draft in my hand trembling slightly from both nerves and the weight of responsibility. The little yellow sticky notes Lily had helped me place the day before were still carefully attached to each important section. A conference staff member whispered behind me, "You're on in 3 minutes." I nodded, feeling as if my heart had just dropped to the bottom of my stomach. Out there, hundreds of people were waiting, women from all over America, single mothers, social workers, teachers, service staff, and even those who had lived through exactly what I had lived. I wasn't a famous speaker. I had no impressive degree or stage experience. I was just Natalie Brooks, the woman who had once been pushed out of a dining table, who had written in the dark to keep herself from falling apart. My name was announced. Soft lights lit the walkway. I stepped out, bringing nothing with me but my heart. The conference room was completely silent. I began with where the story had hit rock bottom. A laundry room, Thanksgiving, and 3 untouched slices of pumpkin pie. I talked about the sadness in my son's eyes, the whispered question from my daughter, and the distant laughter from the room where I once thought I could be accepted. I spoke of the late night shifts, the early morning school drop offs in a car that barely ran, and the stolen moments during work breaks when I would write a few lines on my old phone to preserve a piece of peace for myself. I didn't hide the exhaustion. I didn't erase the moments of humiliation. I let each story walk through the pain completely, not to portray myself as a victim, but to affirm we are not weak for choosing to live truthfully. Then I told them about that limousine, about Evelyn, about how someone had seen me without me having to try to impress them. I shared how I used to think, maybe I'm not smart enough, not good enough, not enough of anything. But the truth is, I had been enough from the very moment I chose not to give up. I didn't know when the tears began to fall down my cheeks, not because I was sad, but because for the first time I was speaking, and someone was listening. When I said my final sentence, I no longer need a pre-assigned seat. I'll build my own table and pull up more chairs for others. The room stayed silent, but not the awkward silence of family gatherings I used to endure. This was the silence of people seeing themselves in the story. Then one woman stood, then another, and then the whole room stood. Applause rose like waves. I stood there, still holding the draft, but no longer needing to read another word. They didn't need perfection. They needed truth. I left the stage, and women came up to hug me, hold my hands, tell me they too had been pushed aside, had eaten Thanksgiving in their cars, had been labeled a burden. One whispered, "You just said what I've held in my heart for 10 years." Another cried, "Thank you for not giving up." I smiled, not the strained smile I used to wear when Amanda criticized me, but a smile that knew I had truly changed someone's life. As I exited the hall, I saw Max waiting, wearing the button-up shirt he had carefully picked out the day before. Beside him was Lily, still clutching the conference program like it was a treasure. Max said quietly, "You were amazing, Mom." For real. I bent down, touched his shoulder. "Thanks, kiddo. I did it for you." That afternoon, I returned to the hotel room, placed the draft on the desk, and realized, for the first time in a very long time, I didn't need to revise anything about myself. I used to think my worth only existed when others approved it. But it turns out that worth had always been there. I just had to stop asking permission to live truthfully. I had once been placed on the margins. Today, the entire room stood for me. And that was the strongest affirmation that I would never again be waiting in any laundry room. 1 month after the Voices Rising conference, I received the first book bearing my name, More Than Enough. The cover was simple, black and white, showing me and my 2 children, 3 small figures holding hands as they crossed a busy street. I didn't cry right when I opened the box, but when Max picked it up, turned to the first page and softly said, "It has your name, Mom." The tears came and I couldn't hold them back. I used to think I was just the leftover piece, the last one no one picked. But that day, holding that book in my hands, I knew one thing clearly. The very things that once made me feel small had now become the things that allowed me to touch other people's hearts. Messages from readers began pouring in. Some were short, some long, hurried, or hesitant, but they all carried the same feeling. I saw myself in every story you told. Some people sent photos of underlined pages marked with highlighters. Some wrote just one line. You helped me stand up. I read them all. A woman from Idaho shared that she once lived in a friend's basement after her divorce, and for the first time, didn't feel alone after reading my story about that cold night eating instant noodles with my kids. A 72-year-old woman from Pennsylvania wrote a handwritten letter. "I've lived quietly my whole life. Thank you for showing me that quiet doesn't mean invisible. I no longer live to be acknowledged. I live to reach those who thought no one remembered them." Then the next Thanksgiving arrived. There was no invitation from Amanda's house, no message from my mother. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I didn't need to. Because this year, Thanksgiving would take place right in my small Brooklyn apartment, where every corner, every seat, was filled with intentional choice, not reluctant acceptance. I got up early to prepare the turkey, while Max took charge of the mashed potatoes. Lily was busy making handmade thank you cards for each guest. I watched her carefully glue golden leaves and write each line in glittery ink. "Thank you for being the real family to me and my mom." There were 8 people around the table that day: me, Max, Lily, Evelyn, 2 new friends I'd met at the conference named Carla and Dina, and the elderly couple who lived next door, Walter and Ruby. No one shared blood ties, but everyone had chosen to stay. Evelyn arrived early, bringing homemade pumpkin soup. She stepped in, placed the pot on the stove, and said, "It's the first time I've skipped the office party. I think this is really where I wanted to be." I smiled, tying an apron around her waist. "Well then, today you're my sous chef. No more being a director." "She chef?" Evelyn burst out laughing. "This leadership model needs improvement, Natalie." The kitchen echoed with laughter. Max played soft jazz. Lily darted around the table, checking if all the silverware was placed correctly. I leaned against the kitchen doorway, watching it all. The apartment wasn't big. The dining table had to be pushed up against the wall. Some dishes were placed temporarily on the bookshelf, but no one cared. Because what mattered wasn't the space, it was the atmosphere. After the meal, Lily stood up and pulled a folded paper from her pocket. She adjusted her dress, cleared her throat, and said, "I have a speech." Everyone laughed but fell silent to listen. "Last year, I ate Thanksgiving dinner in a laundry room. I didn't understand why we were placed there. But this year I get it. Because if we hadn't been pushed out of the table, maybe we wouldn't have created our own. And now I know I am really home." I raised my hand to cover my mouth, trying to hold back tears. Evelyn gently took my hand and gave it a soft squeeze. Max stood up and said quietly, "Thank you, Mom. Thank you for never giving up." I stood too, raising my glass of apple cider, my voice trembling. I used to think family meant those who gave birth to us, raised us. But now I know. Real family is the people who choose to love you every day without needing a reason. And today, I'm sitting among those people. We clinked glasses. Not in unison, not perfectly, but sincerely. And in that moment, I knew. I had finally found home. Not a home with sparkling chandeliers or a long table that could seat 20 people, but a warm kitchen where laughter rang out and no one had to try to be seen. I was no longer the one waiting in the hallway. I was the one inviting others to my table. 1 week after Thanksgiving at the small apartment in Brooklyn, I received an email with a simple subject line that made my heart pound. National Women's Conference, closing session invitation. They didn't just want me to return. They wanted me to appear as an honored guest, to join a panel discussion with women who had heard my speech the previous year and then changed their lives. I read the email 3 times, not because I doubted it, but to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Max walked into the living room, hair still wet from basketball practice, and saw me sitting quietly in front of the screen. "What's up, Mom? You okay?" I pointed at the screen. "They want me back, not to speak to them, but with them." He smiled brightly. "Well, yeah, duh. You're a whole vibe now." I laughed. "A vibe? Really?" "Like, empowering main character energy," Max said, and Lily's voice called out from somewhere in the kitchen. "She's the mom boss." Just a few years ago, I couldn't even lift my head during parent-teacher conferences. And now, my kids call me Mom Boss. Not because I have power, but because I built a place for myself that no one could take away. This year's conference was held at a newly opened arts center in Chicago. When I walked into the lobby, I no longer felt fear or out of place. I didn't need to shrink myself to fit into this space. I knew I had a right to be there, without having to flaunt it, without asking permission. On the lapel of the light gray blazer I wore that day was a small wooden table pin, the symbol of the Build Your Own Table project that Evelyn and I co-founded, aimed at helping women rebuild their lives using their own voices and talents. That day's panel featured 6 women. None of them were alike, but they all shared one thing in common. They had once sat on the sidelines, and after hearing my story a year ago, they asked themselves, if she could do it, why can't I? The first was Marcy, a retired teacher. She shared that after watching the video of my speech, she began volunteering at the local single mothers support center. I used to think my time had passed, but then I realized value isn't in titles, it's in making someone feel seen. Next was Shonda, a mother of 3 who had lived in a van through 2 winters. Now she owns a small bakery near her kids' school. I remembered what Natalie said, don't ask for a seat, build your own table. So I started saving every penny, dug out my grandma's old recipes, and opened a little sidewalk stand. One by one, each woman lifted her own voice, unafraid, unfiltered. I sat there, no longer the storyteller, but the listener. And I realized my journey didn't end when I stepped off stage last year. It had only just begun, each time someone else stood up. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't read from paper. I brought no script. I stood, took a deep breath, and began. I used to think that to be accepted, I had to be smaller, softer, less difficult. But I was wrong. Sometimes people don't reject you because you lack something, but because they don't know how to value you. And that doesn't determine your worth. It only shows. It's time for you to carve out your own place. I looked out at the hundreds of faces below, eyes glistening, hands clasped tightly, smiles filled with deep empathy. No one clapped, no one made a sound, but I could feel they were listening with their whole hearts. When I finished, Evelyn embraced me. She whispered, "Natalie, last year you touched people's hearts. This year you helped them find their own voices." That night, I opened my laptop, placed my hands on the keyboard, and typed the first line of my second book. Not everyone needs a seat. Some were born to stand on stage. And for the first time in my life, I looked at the screen without doubting anything about myself. I no longer write to exist. I write because I know I have something to give. The first morning after the conference in Chicago, I woke up in the quiet hotel room, soft morning light seeping through the thick curtains. Max had gone downstairs for breakfast with the teen volunteer group, and Lily was still curled up under the blanket beside me, her head resting on my arm like when she was little. I stretched, reached for the laptop on the desk near the window, and opened the draft of my second book. The first line was still there. Not everyone needs a seat. Some were born to stand on stage. I read it again and smiled, not because it was clever, but because it was true. Less than an hour later, I received a call from Evelyn. Her voice was clear, excited like a child about to reveal a surprise. "Natalie, there's someone else who wants to meet you." "Who is it?" "A producer from a local television channel in New York. They've been following your journey and want to invite you to share your story on the air, not just to inspire, but to expand the message of build your own table to even more women." I froze for a few seconds, then laughed. "You think the girl who used to sit in the laundry room is going on TV?" Evelyn replied without hesitation. "No. I know that girl is going on television. As a leader." After the call, I took Lily for a walk around the art exhibit near the hotel. She held my hand and kept asking, "Mom, how many people have read your book?" I didn't have a specific answer. I just said, "Enough to matter." Then Lily stopped, tilted her head, her black hair spilling out from under her knit hat. "I think there are a lot of people like you. They just haven't been told they deserve to be loved too." I turned to look at her, a look deeper than words, and I understood. Everything I'm doing is not for fame, money, or position, but so that many other women can say to themselves, "I deserve it too." When we got back home to Brooklyn, there was a cream-colored envelope in the mailbox with a stamp from Beacon Light Publishing in Boston. Inside was the first printed copy of the audiobook contract. They didn't just want to release more than enough in audio format. They wanted me to be the one reading it in my own voice. I collapsed onto the kitchen chair, the contract still carrying the scent of fresh paper. I read each line, trembling but no longer confused, because now I knew. My voice carried weight. For many years, I believed my voice should only whisper, not to disturb anyone, not to make anyone uncomfortable, not to be too loud. I used to shrink at crowded tables, only speaking when asked, always giving up the best slice of cake to others. But now, that very voice was being invited to echo on behalf of thousands of women still walking through the dark. Evelyn called again, her voice filled with sunshine. "The studio is ready, next Monday. They even have a play area for Max and Lily." I looked up at the two of them playing Monopoly in the living room. Max looked at me, raising an eyebrow. "TV appearance? Recording studio? You're kind of famous now, Mom." I smiled. "Not famous, honey, just finally seen." That evening, while cleaning up after dinner, Lily hugged me from behind and whispered, "Mom, do you know how many people called you inspiring today?" I turned around, bent down to look at her. I'm just someone who learned not to ask for permission to live truthfully. Max, sitting on the couch, looked up. Not just learned. You teach us that every day. I sat down between the two of them, placed my hand over my chest, the place that had felt so empty for so many years. And for the first time, I felt it was full. I used to think I was the leftover crumbs from parties I wasn't invited to. But now I know. It was from those very crumbs that I pieced together the fullest version of myself. And I don't need anyone's permission. I don't need anyone to open a door. I don't need anyone to assign me a seat. I've built an entire stage. And I didn't step onto it alone. I brought with me hundreds, thousands of people who once thought they were just shadows. Now they stand beside me, under the lights, and say words they never dared to speak before. I deserve it.